Hello everybody, I'm Forrest Warner, instructional designer on the research and instructional design team here at Hamilton. I'm here today to show you a bit about Tinkercad and some of the tools that are associated with it and how you can best use it for 3D printing. When you come to Tinkercad, you will need to create an account, which is fairly simple. You can use your Google sign-ins for that, and then when you first get into your account, to create your first design, this is something what it might look like. To get to your designs and where you can start creating things 3D modeling, you're going to go down to your left here and hit designs. And we want to go ahead and create a new design. They give you a couple different options of types of projects to work on. You want 3D design. And that'll go ahead and open up a workspace here. So this is your work plane for Tinkercad. To navigate the space, you're going to want to use a mouse with a middle mouse button or a scroll wheel. If you use your right click and hold, you can shift the work plane around. That'll be useful for when you have an object in place. Or if you click and hold your middle mouse button, you can shift things left and right, up and down. If I scroll with the wheel, I'll zoom in and out. So that's how you're going to generally navigate around your objects as you create them. So what's cool about Tinkercad is it has a lot of basic shapes built into it. So you don't necessarily have to build everything from scratch. You can just use some of their basic shapes here, and they're listed on the right here. You can see there's cubes, cylinders, pyramids, text-based objects, a lot of different options here. If you click here, you'll see there's a lot of other objects as well that are listed here that aren't part of the basic objects, but you can also search as well. So if you're ever looking for a specific shape, say I want an arrow, it'll search for me and it'll find that if there's arrows available. So that's pretty neat. So I'm going to go ahead and start off by creating a cube or a box in this instance. I'm just going to plop it down. You just click it and then it'll automatically come over, and then you just click again to drop it. When you drop an object, it's selected. You can see it with that little blue bounding box around it. It also has lots of different control points to it as well. So if we go ahead and mess around with some of these control points, you'll see that you can scale an object. I can, with this vertical white square, I can raise. So if I want to make an object taller, if I want to just shift out one side or the other, I just select these black dots. If you select the corners, you can do both at the same time. Now if I want to physically move the object, I can just click and drag it, move it around wherever I need to. It's cool because it tells you how far you've moved it and where you've moved it from its original point. And I can, if I want to move it up, I use this little, click on this little arrow here, and I can drag an object up. So what's particularly neat is, like, again, you can create objects. You can just create lots of them. It's very easy just to click and drag them and bring them over. But what's really cool too is if I want to modify this object, so say I want to put a hole in the middle of this cube. I'm going to go ahead and delete these right here, and I'm going to create a cylinder. And what's neat is that when your objects are, they can be objects, but they can also be what's called a hole. So if I want to make an object that's going to become a hole, I just turn it into a hole and not a solid. So a couple things here. So when I click on the object, I get a couple things. Not every object has this. So when you click on your object, you have all of these different properties here that you can change just by messing with the sliders. And that's a pretty handy way of handling that. One thing is, if for some reason, you'll notice how there's lots of different, you can see the edges here. So it looks a little low res. What we can do is we can come into here and we can make that higher. So I can go ahead and add many more sides so it's a much more smoother hole. Same thing here. If I want to mess with the shape, I can do that here. Same thing here. Mess with, add more segments to an object. So it's just another way to add resolution, make the object a little more complete. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to make this, again, put a hole in the middle of this object here. So I'm going to make this a little bigger. I'm going to make it so that it will go through the object entirely because I want to make a hole. I want to make sure it's also under the work plane, so it'll also get through on the bottom here. And I'm going to go ahead and put that towards the middle of this object here. One thing that's cool is you can actually align objects as well. So if I select this object and I select this other one and I want to line them up, I'm going to click this here. What's cool is it gives you these little dots where it'll take the two objects and it'll align it to that specific spot on the object. If I click that, it'll move it to the center here. Come here, I want to move it center here as well. So now the object should be exact center on the box. So what I want to do now is I want to make sure I turn this cylinder into a hole, just like so. And I want to select the cube as well. I use Shift and I selected them both. You can also use the bounding box. So if you click and drag on the left mouse button, you can select all these objects with a bounding box. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to group them. And when I group it, and this one went pretty quick. Sometimes, depending on the object, it will take a minute, but now we have a hole in the middle of our box. So if for whatever reason we needed to have that like that, we can. Pretty neat. If we wanted to add more, we can easily just add more cylinders if we wanted to, or if for some reason we wanted to make any changes, this isn't permanent. What you can do is, since you grouped the object, you can ungroup it. So if I go back up here and go to ungroup, it'll actually bring those objects back to where they were. So what I could do now is if I wanted to, like, well, it's not exactly where I wanted it to be, so I'm just going to move over here, recombine, group it, and now the hole's here. Now again, depending on the object, that might be slower or faster, depending on how complex the model is. But that's essentially how you use the two main tools that are in Tinkercad. Another thing too, if for whatever reason you needed to hide an object, so if you had multiple objects, you just want to hide one, you can hit the select the object and just come up here and hit hide selected, and that will go ahead and disappear the object. If you ever need to bring anything, because you could hide multiple objects, if you ever wanted to bring them all back, you just come back up here, hit show all. There's a lot to play with here. There's a lot of different little tools. It's fun to explore this program. One thing too is, again, as you move objects, they snap. And on this grid, it's snapping at a 1 millimeter. Each time we move it, it's another millimeter. If for whatever reason you needed to change that and didn't want it to be snapped, you come down here to this snap grid, and you can change how big those snaps are. So you can make them very big. So like by 5 millimeters, as I move this, each time it's 5 millimeters. Or I could set it down to something as small as 0.1 millimeter, and I make those small incremental changes. But by standard, it's on 1 millimeter. And the same thing when you actually are resizing these shapes, that's what those numbers are. That's millimeters. So if you ever need to know exactly how big an object's going to be or needs to be, that's what those readings are. And what's cool too is if you click on this and I want to make a change to any of these numbers, so like, hey, that actually is supposed to be 50, I can just click on it, type 50, hit enter, and now, boom, now it's 50 in that. A couple other things too. So again, I showed you how to move objects. You can also spin objects. So I can rotate this, and you'll see it just goes in these little chunks. The further you hold out, like as I pull away from the object, the more detailed in like incremental those movements, the rotation is. Again, as I move closer to the object, you'll see how it's just much boom, 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 big chunk moves. But they're very like on like, so this would be, what is it? So that's like 90 degrees, negative 90, 180, just like so. And again, if you pull it out a little bit, it's a little bit, you can do those detailed spins. Cool. So say I'm done with this project and I want to export the result. So I am done. I don't want to do any more in my edit, and I just want to go ahead and export it. I'm just going to come up to this export button here, click on it, and I want to make sure that I export the object as an STL, because that's what you need as a 3D print, and that's what the file you would send to me. You want to make sure too is if you're going to use everything in the design, or if you're going to select specific objects. So if you happen to have multiple objects in a thing, you just want to make sure you select the one that you actually want to output and export. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a project that I already have working on for a specific object that's related to your course. I'm going to go ahead and open that now. And what's cool too, just so you know, it saves your project automatically. So as you're doing work, it saves it here. I didn't name it, so it gives it like a default name. So that's why you get these crazy names. But I'm going to work on the anatomical heart project here. Once you click on it, it just says if you want to view it or if you want to tinker it. Just make sure you click tinker this, and it'll open the project. This file has anatomical heart inside of it, so it takes a minute to load up. I just want to show you a few different techniques you can use if you are designing an object or working with something that already exists. So here we go. We've got a heart here, and we've got multiple different versions of the heart with different techniques on them. As you can see, I have a cut in half version of the heart here. This heart didn't actually have it doesn't have valves and things in it really, but just gives you an idea of how to split an object. I've got another example here of how to add to an object. We already kind of did that. So I added a arrow shape to this object so that if I wanted to point to something specific, like this specific opening here, I can do that. And I've also created one that has a stand on it. So if I wanted to make a stand that was separate from whatever I'm trying to print so that I had something for it to sit on, I can show you how to do that as well. So just to start out here, so I'm going to work my way down the line. I'm going to show you how to split an object like this. So what's cool is you always want to make a duplicate of your object just in case something screws up or like whatever. That way, if you needed to, you can always have a backup just with sitting there ready to go. Up here is the duplicate button. You can also use Control D. If I hit this button once, it creates a duplicate. It sits right on top of the other object, so you can't really tell until I click and drag. So I'm going to take this object and move it over here. I'm going to hide these guys for now. Bring them back, just get them out of the way. So the easiest way to do that, again, we showed it with the box technique. We're going to go ahead and create a box. I'm going to put it like somewhere near halfway. Now I want to make this bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and stretch it out so it's going to envelope the whole half of this object. Because we're going to take a hole. We're going to duplicate the hole. I'm going to turn this into a hole now. And it's cool because you can see through it. So I've got this hole here. And essentially if I took this now and I split this object, it will split it and it will leave me with that one half. But what if I want to split an object in half? So what I actually need to do is essentially do this twice. So I'm going to select my hole here. I'm going to duplicate that hole. I'm going to shift it. And again, I have that snapping here, so it's going to be useful for this. I want to make sure it lines up exactly right up against the other hole like this. Perfect. And for right now, I'm also going to hide that new hole I just created. I'm going to take this and I'm going to duplicate it again. So again, there's two here. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm only going to select one of them. So I click on it once. I'm going to go ahead and select the other hole, and I'm going to group them. Now this takes a minute because it's a more complex object. So with the magic of editing, I'll speed this up a little bit. Okay, so the object has been cut. You can kind of see the line that's being drawn down, the one that's been cut in half. I want to select the other heart, the whole full heart. I'm going to unhide all the objects here so I can see that box again. I'm going to hide these again so they're not in our way. I'm going to make sure I select that other full heart, select the box again, and then I'm going to group them. Same thing, it's going to take a moment, but what's going to happen is once this completes, you're going to be left with essentially in a perfectly split in half version of this heart. So if you ever wanted to do a dissection on an object or whatever, for whatever reason, or wanted to see inside of it, this is an easy way to split that object in half. Cool. So at this point, we have two perfect halves of a heart here. So I can take this, drag this over, boom, drag this over, and we're left with the two halves. So that's essentially how you would handle that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Let's take a look at some of the other ones here. So if I want to add an object to an object, we already saw this. So it would work essentially the same way as using a hole. So I'm going to create a duplicate of this heart again, drag it over to the center here. I'm going to go ahead and add an object to it. I'm going to hide these again. So same thing. If I want to, again, look for an arrow, see what they have. This is the arrow I used before. Just click it, and then you can drop it in your project. And now you want to manipulate it just like any of the other objects. So if I need this to be up straight, make sure it's on a 90. If I want to resize it or anything, I can do so. And then I just need to position it where I would need it. So let's say, again, in my other one, I had it pointing at this specific hole. So if I needed it to be in that location, I'm going to spin this around. I'm going to raise it. Now working in a 3D space can be confusing because this looks like, oh, it's perfect. It's right where it needs to be, but it's not actually touching the object. So what we need to do is we want to move this over till it's actually physically becoming part of the object. I'm going to spin it a little more. I'm actually even going to give it a little bit of spin it towards the heart a little bit here. Move it in a little bit, because again, it has to kind of become part of the object itself. Just want to make sure I leave a little bit exposed. This actually might be a spot that makes sense to change the snap grid. I'm going to change it to 0.25. Give me a little more control. Perfect. So now that that's where I kind of want it to be, arrow still has its shape, pointing to a specific spot on the heart here. Make sure I have that selected and the heart selected, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to group them. Same deal. It's going to take a moment, attach the objects to each other. That one took a minute, but now it's complete. So if that printed, those two would be attached for sure. So we should be perfect there. Great. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and delete that object. And then we're going to create one more. So this last one, we're not modifying the heart at all, except we're making a small hole in the bottom of the heart so that we can put a post in it so that the heart can rest on that as a stand. So again, I'm going to go ahead and grab a heart. I'm going to duplicate it, drag it over into the center here. I'm going to hide these one more time. I'm also going to go ahead and raise the heart up a little bit. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my basic shapes. I'm going to create a box. Scale it down here. Make it about yay high. Stretch it so it's about as wide, if not a little bit wider than the heart. Same thing on the front and back. Again, if you want to get a good view, you can actually up here is, if I wanted to get a flat view of any of these things, I can easily skip around to the different sides without having to manually use my mouse to navigate. So that's a quick way to like get a different view. All right. One thing I want to do here is I want to line up the center of mass with this. So I'm going to go ahead and do what I did before. Select these both. I'm going to go up to a line. I want this center to be right, and I want this angle to line up. Boom. Nice. All right, same thing as before. Like when I put a hole in the box, I'm going to grab a cylinder, create it quick. I'm going to turn those segments up. Actually, the segments I don't want. I want the sides. I'm going to turn the sides up. I might even add a small bevel to it because it's going to be put inside of this object. And then I'm going to, let's see, I want to make this smaller. Let's say 10. I also want this to be 10. So the shape is nice and round. I'm going to raise it up just a little bit. And then I'm going to make it longer. So it's going to go inside the heart. All right. Same thing here. We want to line this up with the box. Boom, center there. Boom, center there. Nice. So what I'll do here is I'm going to take the cylinder and I'm going to attach it to the base. So make sure the two objects are selected, and I'm going to group them. Nice. So now the base, the cylinder, and the actual the box are now one piece. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to make a whole version of the base so that I can cut out a hole in the bottom of this heart here. So what I need to do is make a duplicate of the base, turn that into a hole, select the heart, and then I'm going to group them. And this might take a minute. All right, perfect. So now this is completed. So if I take the base, and hide it for a second here, you'll see now there's a hole in the bottom here. Now the thing with this heart is it's a solid object, but it has a hollow interior. So that post will slide right inside of the object. It will just slide all the way to the bottom of the base. You could do that if you wanted it to be that way, where it just slid all the way down. But if for whatever reason we wanted the base to, the heart to sit up this high on the base, what we can do is we can add a little something to the base to keep it from sliding down. In this case, what I had done in my other one is I took a ball, like a sphere, I shrunk it down like so. Probably still needs to be smaller yet. I'm gonna shrink it that way, shrink it that way, make it even smaller again. I'm gonna go ahead and move that in position. What I did is I actually had it kind of sit outside like so. I can do the same thing here with this, so we can align them. I only really need it to align with the center. Nice. So if I take that sphere and raise it up to where the model's going to bump into it. So when we print this model, set it on here, this will have a little jut out, and that'll keep it from sliding further down the post. So if I make sure I have that selected and the base selected, I'm going to go ahead and group those together again. And now they're all one. So what I would do is I would actually keep these as two separate objects. You could grab both of them and combine, group them to make one object that you could print. But in this case, you'd want to print the heart separately from the base, so you'd still keep them as two separate objects. Just make sure when you select them and move them around, you just keep them together and then put it wherever you need it. Yep, and those are some of the basics for Tinkercad. If you have any questions, please be sure to reach out. My email is fwarner@hamilton.edu, and I am happy to work with you on your project. Thank you.